Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor. A few years ago I bought a very old and quite famous wooden sailing boat for the price of $1, and since then I've been rebuilding that boat from the keel up with the help of a lot of amazing people. Now this video is going to be about making the rest of the cap rails, shaping the top profile on all of them and then fitting them to the boat. A few videos ago you might have seen me cutting out the first few pieces and fitting them over the tenons on the top of the stanchions. I've got to cut out a few more of those before I can start the shaping process. Now, if you're wondering how I cut the mortises in the bottom of the cap rail so they would fit so precisely over the tenons in all the stanchions, I covered that process in much more detail in my previous video about the cap rails. But basically I made a pattern for each piece of cap rail using thin plywood with an oversized hole around the tenon and then glue tabs up to the tenon to show the exact size and location of those tenons when I put the patterns onto the actual teak cap rail pieces. Once I had all the rough cut cap rail pieces fitted to the boat with the mortises matching the tenons on the stanchions, I just needed to trim the shape of the inside of the cap rails. I'd already got the outside shape by laying a very long batten the whole length of the boat on top of the patterns when I still had the patterns on the boat. And having faired that outside shape a little bit on the boat, I just made a simple gauge to transfer the width of the cap rail from the outside line to the inside line. You'll see that one section of the cap rail is wider than the rest, and that is the area which is going to serve as our pin rail. That means that there will be belaying pins mounted through the cap rail in that position, and those belaying pins will act as places that certain lines from the rig, such as halyards, can be made off. Now, after the inside shape has been cut and slightly faired, I can remove all the teak cap rail pieces to take them off the boat and start shaping them.
feel this for me? Thanks, Nick.
This week's video is sponsored by Vessi, who make 100% waterproof shoes. Now we all know that getting wet feet sucks, but it also sucks to have to avoid situations where they might get wet. And sometimes that's unavoidable.
Wet socks again?
Hey Bob, you got the time?
Every time. I hate wet feet.
Vessi shoes are lightweight, extremely comfortable, and super easy to clean. Convenient and practical waterproof shoes that you enjoy being outside even more, regardless of the weather. Vessi shoes are great for exploring beaches or rivers, stomping around puddles in the city, or just avoiding the hazards of a coffee break. I've honestly been surprised how comfortable and practical these Vessi shoes are, and they're actually offering a special offer of 15% off right now if you use our special code SAMSONBOAT. So check out the link below and head to their website to have a look yourself. And thanks to Vessi for sponsoring this video. What should I do now?
I have no idea, the tide's coming in.
But look, I still have dry socks.
No.
Yeah. Now that all the teak cap rail pieces have been dry fitted to the boat, the scarf joints are all tight, and the pieces have been removed again, I'm ready to actually start shaping them. Now the shape that I designed for the top of the cap rail pieces is a sort of very wide organic curve, and so I'm going to have to do it by hand, but the shape of the bottom corner is just a simple roundover, so I'm going to do that first, and I'm able to just use a router for that. Now you'll see while I'm shaping that roundover, at one point I actually trim a bung that I've glued into the cap rail, and that was where I messed up. I let the guide on the router bit go into the counterbore that I'd already drilled for one of the through bolts in the scarf joints. Because of the counterbore, there was no material to guide the router bit, and so the bit itself plunged too deep into the cap rail, so I put a bung there to repair it. People have been asking recently to see some more mistakes, and although I didn't catch the actual mistake on camera, I've got part of the fix on camera. Now that the bottom corners have been shaped, it's time to shape the top of the cap rail. And I designed a kind of profile for the cap rail which has a wide organic curve on the top, which I think is going to look really nice. Because the cap rail is quite wide, it's about 5 inches, if I just did a regular roundover on the top corners, there'll be a really wide flat spot on the top, and I think that's not as elegant as a slow tapering curve. However, I'm clearly a glutton for punishment because doing it with the router would be very quick and easy, but doing it like this kind of has to be done by hand. It could possibly be done with a shaper machine, but I couldn't find a bit that was big enough, and the curve of the cap rails would mean it would be pretty challenging to put them through a shaper anyway. I approached this shaping work sort of like I would approach shaping a round spar. I started out by drawing the profile to scale and then drew a number of faces onto it that I could plane down to that would remain slightly outside of the final profile. Then I just transferred those measurements to the cap rail pieces, drew them down the whole length and started planing.
I spent the first half of a day just fighting with a bolt that didn't want to go in. Today is one of those days where you're just not getting shit done.
Neil, you can say that, but you've made solid progress today. You say that on a lot of days when you actually get quite a bit done.
I just don't get what I want done. That's the reality. And I feel like I'm holding the tears in.
So what are you trying to do but not really doing?
Me?
Yeah.
No, ask what he's actually getting done.
What are you actually getting done today?
I finished installing the bobstay today, and I've been, there she is in all of her glory, shining in the sunlight.
Hey, Leo. What you doing?
Planing.
Ludi. What are you doing? What you doing, Joe?
Making brackets.
Talking with Dylan.
About brackets.
Let me see. What's it for?
I'm just making a little bracket for the water maker control so we can find a little tiny piece of real estate to mount it on.
Hey.
I've been filmed.
Hello.
Oh. Are we live?
We're live. What are you doing?
I'm varnishing this weatherboard.
Beautiful.
It helps the boat if it's all shiny.
So once I'd planed the first angled faces into the top corners of some of the cap rail pieces, I just transferred the measurements for the next two faces that take off the next two corners. I made some small gauges to quickly and accurately make those marks down the lengths of all the cap rail pieces. And then by planing down to those marks and taking off the next two corners, I would take the number of faces on one side of the cap rail from 3, including the top and the side, to 5. I would do this on both sides of the cap rail, so there'd be a total of 9 faces, including the 2 sides and the top. After that was done, I wanted to take off the corners again, getting it even closer to round. But this time there were too many faces and the angles were too shallow to be able to easily measure and mark the new faces. Because of that, I need to plane the next faces sort of freehand without any marks, but to help see how much has been planed and how much hasn't, I covered the whole cap rail in chalk. And then as I planed the corners off, I was able to see the amount that had been planed versus the amount that was left. And if I could get all those stripes to look kind of even, then that should mean that it's getting closer and closer to a fair curve without going too deep on any of the faces. After that, I set my plane blade very shallow and just kind of go diagonally across the grain, working along the cap rail, and then switch to sandpaper and really work at it for a long time with 80 grit sandpaper, again going diagonally across the grain in all directions and then around the corner onto the bottom. And eventually, finally, you end up with a really nice, organic, fair profile. Well, the cap rails are on the boat. I'm really pleased with how they look, with how they came out. I really like the shape and the profile and the way that the pin rails sort of melt into the rest of the shape. It's necessary to have a full round and a flat top on the pin rail areas because that will work better with the way that lines are belayed to the pins there. Now the cap rails are still only dry fitted right now. Later on they do still have to be bedded, but there's some hardware that has to go in the deck underneath them before they get fitted for good, and it's not quite ready yet. I also still have to make the portion of the cap rail that goes over the transom at the stern of the boat, which is often called the taffrail, and the small pieces that join the taffrail to the cap rail. Now the cap rails are teak, of course, and they're actually going to be left unfinished. That means they're not going to be painted or varnished, they're going to be left raw wood. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that you often have to stand on the cap rail if you're going on and off the boat, or sometimes if you're doing things with rigging while sailing, and if they're varnished, they can be very slippery. So the raw teak gives a much better grip, much like the raw teak that we're leaving on the deck. Also, cap rails do tend to get abused quite a lot. They might get banged by blocks or by jackyards or any number of things, dinghies going on and off the boat. And although small impacts like that often won't actually damage the wood, they will very often crack or damage the varnish. And so it's very common when you do see varnished cap rails that there can be a lot of spots where the varnish is damaged, water gets under it, it has to be repaired, it never looks quite as good. So it's basically a very high maintenance area for varnish. Teak, being incredibly oily and rot resistant, is okay to be unfinished. It does really quite well in that condition. It will go a sort of light grey colour in time, but I think that actually looks really good and it'll complement the deck and other areas of raw teak that exist on the boat. Anyway, that's all we got time for right now, but thanks a lot for watching, and a massive, massive thank you to everyone who has donated or otherwise supported this project. It does make a huge difference. It means we're able to keep on doing this work and we're able to keep on making and editing these videos. So I really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Shit, there's just like a giant puddle inside the building now.
Alright, I'll clean that up.
Ready for the outtakes.
It's so cold!